Chancellor Kawari of the Citids tried to hide a yawn behind one of his tentacles. He did not appreciate being awoken from his slumber in the middle of the night. Whatever reason the Supreme Chancellor had to summon the ruling council better be good. He almost fell back to sleep, waiting for the rest of the council to join them. He sat up straighter as the Supreme Chancellor entered the chamber with the 6 other beings behind them. He recognized the 5 members of the coalition's military high command, but while the 6th being wore a military uniform, he didn't know them. It wasn't out of the ordinary for 1 or 2 members of the high command to attend a council session, but having all 5 at a session ordered in the middle of the night was not good news. Supreme Chancellor Saduhi called for order and stood up to address the gathering. "My friend, I'm sorry to call a session in the middle of the night and disturb your rest cycles, but I assure you the reason for it is most urgent." The Supreme Chancellor gestured to one of the military officers. "Fleet Admiral Timua, would you share with the council what you told me earlier?" Fleet Admiral Timua stepped forward and nodded to the unknown military officer. "This is Legate Nesanhur, and she is the head of military intelligence." The legate bowed before stepping back and moving to the controls for the chamber's hollow imager. She tapped a few commands into the console, and a map of the coalition's territory appeared in the air. After a moment, she zoomed the map to Sector 1526 on the coalition's border with unclaimed space. With no systems for over 5 parsecs, it was only of interest to coalition scientists studying the stellar phenomena of the region. It also showed the recently defined border with a relatively recent addition to the galactic community. The humans had only made contact about 100 galactic years ago, GY, with the border set less than 30 GY previously. The humans were a mostly peaceful race that preferred to engage in trade, exploration, and diplomacy over military conflict. But underestimating their military capabilities is a very bad idea, as the Plix found out. With the humans having less advanced technology, the Plix assumed they would be easy pickings. The Plix and the rest of the galaxy learned a valuable lesson from the humans. Their knowledge of warfare helped level the field against a technologically superior enemy. It had been centuries since most of the galactic community had engaged in a large-scale war, and they'd gotten complacent. The great powers in the galaxy utilized energy weapons in space combat, so they naturally used energy shields for defense against the weapons. But the humans preferred projectile weapons, missiles, torpedoes, and armoring their ships. The Plix shields were far less effective against human weapons than they expected. The humans used a variety of tactics in both space and on the surface of several worlds that Plix had trouble understanding, let alone countering. It took less than half a GY for the Plix to sue for peace. They'd hurt the humans, but with every battle, the humans tried new things and revealed new technology re-engineered from the Plix ships they captured or salvaged. It became obvious things were starting to get out of hand, and the Plix had lost the initiative in the war, so they cut their losses and started to negotiate. In one of the weirdest peace treaties ever known in galactic history, the humans asked for several systems, but offered compensation for them instead of reparations offered by the Plix. Of course, the Plix accepted, and for years the galaxy thought humans foolish for not only declining reparations, but offering to pay for the 6 systems they asked for. It was 10 GY before the coalition understood how clever the humans were. The lenient terms with the Plix eventually turned into wary peace and lucrative trade deals. The Plix are now one of their closest allies and trading partners. The systems they requested provided them borders with the coalition and several other races. It allowed them to trade directly with these entities and avoid the costs involved with shipping goods via a third party. They gained far more than they would have gotten if they just demanded reparations and seized the systems. So when the map began to zoom in closer to the border with the humans, there was some trepidation of a conflict igniting with the humans. But the system highlighted did not border human space. Fleet Admiral Timua indicated the highlighted system. "This is System T-57,284. There were several small colonies in the system." The Fleet Admiral turned to look at the council members as he spoke. "Notice I said were. They are gone now, not destroyed or occupied, but eradicated. Nothing left on those worlds but sterile soil and rocks. Every scrap of organic life and non-organic material is completely gone." "What did that?" one of the council members exclaimed. With a glance at the Supreme Chancellor and a return nod from him, Fleet Admiral Timua looked at the intelligence officer. "Bring up file hash 78,267 SC, please." he asked before walking over to the console. He tapped a few commands before straightening up and speaking aloud. Fleet Admiral Timua, authorizing the opening of file hash 78267 SC. One by one, the other members of the High Command approached the console and repeated the steps taken by the Fleet Admiral. An image of what looked like a dark comet appeared in the holosphere. This file is one of our most guarded secrets, and normally only accessible by the members of the High Command. Even the Supreme Chancellor has only seen parts of it. This file was initiated over a century ago, after a derelict ship emerged from unclaimed space. The Fleet Admiral waited for the gasps of astonishment and outcries of the Chancellors to subside before starting again. We don't fully understand the exact location of its origin. Besides the unexplored parts of the galaxy beyond the unclaimed space, it was very old, at least 1 millennia old, and the crew was long dead. The image of a strange-looking ship hovered in the holosphere. The Fleet Admiral continued. It took our scientists decades to begin translating the ship's database. It contained a warning about some kind of enemy they called the Scourge. It was some kind of horde of mechanical life forms that would attack anything containing organic matter and any non-organic matter above ground. It uses the organic matter as an energy source to turn metals and other materials into more of them. These things had completely consumed everything in the part of the galaxy the ship came from. The database said there were trillions of them. The Fleet Admiral turned and pointed to the dark comet. One of our observation drones caught this image and transmitted it via subspace, so this image is less than a day old. This image matches one contained in the ancient ship's database. The Fleet Admiral looked around the room and looked at every council member. Chancellors, this is the Scourge, and it is a massive force. Current estimates are that it contains over 1 quintillion of these things in it. Chancellor Kawari had to look up the number on his datapad and nearly dropped it when he saw what it meant. He was so distracted in his research that he almost missed the Fleet Admiral's next words. And now it's entered our part of the galaxy and heading our way. The Fleet Admiral finished. What does the High Command propose to do about this? Chancellor Kawari shouted. The Fleet Admiral turned and looked at the Chancellor before speaking. Do? There is nothing we can do to fight it. We'll try, but the chance of success looks to be less than 1%. All we'd really do is feed the damn things, but we'll try to buy time to evacuate the worlds and colonies in its route. The database also mentioned they're attracted to artificial signals, so populated places will need to go dark and only use tight beam communications. We've alerted the humans in case they head towards them instead. The Supreme Chancellor will inform the ambassadors of the other governments. The Fleet Admiral finished. Chancellor Kawari got the Fleet Admiral's attention before speaking. How long before it reaches our highly populated systems? 27 days, give or take, he replied in a subdued tone. The chamber erupted in a low roar as members talked and shouted at each other. The others were so involved in their discussions and histrionics that they didn't notice the legate approach the Fleet Admiral and whisper something to him. Whatever it was surprised the Fleet Admiral so much that he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. They're doing what? He exclaimed. I want confirmation. His question instantly brought all noise to a stop. It took him a moment to realize his outburst had been noticed. My apologies, Chancellors, but I just received some startling news, the Fleet Admiral explained. If you remember, I mentioned the database said the Scourge are attracted to artificial signals. Well, humans began broadcasting a large amount of those kinds of signals from one of their systems on their border with the unclaimed space. Supreme Chancellor Saduhi signaled for attention and spoke once there was silence. Let's adjourn this session for the evening. What you have just been told is of utmost secrecy and only shared with your leaders. It's too soon to let the public know without causing a panic. The Supreme Chancellor looked around. We'll have a daily briefing session on this matter every morning from now on. 20 days later, Chancellor Kawari was entering the council chamber for another useless briefing on the Scourge. He'd rather sleep in, but he didn't want to miss anything new that might be shared. So he took his seat and waited for it to start. Once the rest of the council had finally taken their seats, the Supreme Chancellor signaled the start of the session. Fleet Admiral Timua began the briefing in the usual form, updating the Scourge's distance as it traveled through unclaimed space towards human space, and the progress of the system of observation drones being placed along the entire border of unclaimed space in both coalition and human territory as an early warning system. Of the situation of the military, the current production numbers of new ships being built to aid evacuation, and so on. Important, but very dull info. Fleet Admiral Timua was just informing the Council of the status of the creation of the evacuation plans when the same legate approached him. Every being in the room focused on the two officers, whispering. "They did what?" the Fleet Admiral loudly exclaimed. "Are you sure?" he continued in a more normal tone. The legate showed him a data pad, and the Fleet Admiral was shocked by what he saw. "Transfer that to the holosphere," he ordered. "Chancellors, I just received some very important information about the Scourge." The Fleet Admiral began. "We were advised by the humans that the Scourge had reached the system they refer to as RG-76 in their space." Gesturing to the holosphere, he continued, "We also confirmed it with the observation drone in the system." The Council watched as the drone's sensor information was converted to a 3D image of a large black cloud entering the system and beginning to spread out to engulf several planets and moons. The Council chamber was so silent, you could hear one of the gorillitic stomachs growl. "This image is about an hour old, sent by subspace before contact with the drone was lost." The Fleet Admiral continued, "We did get a confusing fragment of data that we couldn't explain until now." Once again, the image of the system appeared in the holosphere, but now almost all planets and moons were covered in a cloud of those things that made up the Scourge. A moment later, there was some kind of brief surge of some type that overwhelmed the drone, and communication with the drone ceased. The Fleet Admiral stepped to the center of the floor. "I just received word that the humans attempted to destroy the Scourge." The volume of the room spiked as all the chancellors tried to speak at the same time. "I'm expecting confirmation of this information," the Fleet Admiral said, looking at the legate. The legate nodded his head and uttered, "Confirmed." The last thing he expected to see on the Fleet Admiral's face was shock. He turned to address the Council. "It is just confirmed the humans attacked and likely destroyed the Scourge." He had to take a moment and allow the uproar to die down before he could continue. Chancellor Kawari took the chance to interject a question. "How did they manage that, and why didn't we do it first?" The Fleet Admiral looked at the Chancellor and spoke. "We didn't do it first because it's something we'd never imagine, let alone do. As for how, it was a trap. They used all those signals to lure the Scourge into the system, and then they—" The Fleet Admiral's voice faltered, as if he couldn't believe what he was saying. "They what?" one of the chancellors snapped irritably. "They caused the system's star to go supernova and destroyed everything in the system, either by released radiation or the shockwave," the Fleet Admiral answered. Every member of the chamber looked shocked at the announcement, and then horrified when the implications sunk in. The humans had the power to destroy a star. They were now the preeminent power in the galaxy. Supreme Chancellor Saduhi looked at the Fleet Admiral and asked, "Do we know how they did it?" "We sent a message asking for confirmation and how it was done." The Fleet Admiral replied, "They said it was a one-shot deal and can't be done again. They called it an ancient Chinese secret, whatever that is, and declined to tell us," the Fleet Admiral finished.